Hey guys, this is Colin Moshman for CardsChat.com, and we're continuing on now with me and Katie's course, Become a Winning Poker Player in 30 Days. The topic of day 7 is value betting, and let's not be modest here. This is literally how you win at poker. So what is it? How does it work? Well, if you've read day 7 of the ebook, you hopefully have a decent answer to those questions. But I want to review a few of the important ideas here and then look at some nice hand examples putting everything into action. So let's begin with what is a value bet. Now imagine you're teaching a kindergartner how to play poker. What do? Well, you might get arrested. I don't know. But your best strategy would probably be to keep it real simple. You teach them the rules and then you say something like, okay, what you're going to do is make a decent hand you think beats your opponent's hand and then bet. And that's a really powerful idea. It's easy to get lost in the shuffle of advanced strategy concepts, but whether you're playing low stakes or very high stakes or anything in between, value betting is going to be crucial to beating the games. So like we said in the chapter, there are two main ways to think about whether your hand is best when you're not sure. So obviously if you have a very weak hand, you're pretty confident that your opponent's hand is better. If you have the nuts or very close to it, then you're pretty confident you have the best hand. But otherwise, one way to assess whether your hand is best is when your opponent shows weakness through his betting patterns. In particular, this means that he's taking a lot of neutral and passive actions. He's checking, he's calling, he seems to want to maybe get to a showdown as cheaply as possible, and he's not displaying any desire to put money voluntarily into the pot. So this is going to be the most common way, is our opponent just telling us, based on what he's doing in the hand, that he does not appear to be strong. Now, the other way is one we talk about a little bit in this chapter. We give a hand example and we say, well, one way that we know we probably have the best hand is based on hand combinatorics. You might say, well, Moshman, what are you talking about here? What does this mean? And so what I want to do is I want to pull up an illustration of this in the program Equilab. So here we have up our queen for offsuit. Final board is this king, king, deuce, 7-4. So we've rivered a pair. There's a possible flush draw out there. So what I said is that there are more ways to make junky and weak hands compared to strong hands. And I think we talked a little bit in the previous video about what these hand combinations mean. They're basically like, let's say here, there are two kings accounted for, the king of spades and the king of diamonds. So if we're interested in, let's say, king 9 of spades, our opponent can only have the king of hearts or the king of clubs along with the associated suit, because king of spades, 9 of spades is impossible, and king of diamonds, 9 of diamonds is impossible. So there should only be two different ways to make king 9 suited, aka two different hand combinations, and Equilab can display these for us. And so what I want to do is there's a base of 990 different hand combinations he could potentially have. Is I'm going to pull up all of the ones that beat us, and then we're going to see how that compares to the ones that we beat. So for example, ones that beat us are going to be any hand containing a 7 is going to beat us, both suited or offsuit. We're also going to have any hand containing a king. So I'm just going to pause the video for a second, keep on pulling these up, and then we're going to look at the final number and talk about what that means. Okay, so I officially have carpal tunnel now after clicking, but it was worth it to get up this nice graphical display. So these are all the hand combinations that beat us, okay? Any king, any 7, ace 4 suited or offsuit is going to beat us. All the pocket pairs besides pocket 3s, deuces, and 4s are full houses. These pocket pairs also are going to beat us. And then for all of these others, so for example, 9-5, these are diamonds only. These are only going to be flushes. And you might say, what about 10-4 of diamonds? That's impossible because the river is the 4 of diamonds. So once you write it all out, 30% or 31% of hands he could possibly have beat us. So the vast majority of hands are going to be ones in his range that we beat. Okay, so this shows from a hand combination perspective, we are going to have the best hand the majority of the time, and you can combine these two methods. And what I mean by that is our opponent would probably have bet if he had a very strong hand. If he had a king, he probably would have bet at some point. So when you combine the fact that there are just a ton more random and junky hands in his range from a hand combination perspective, with the fact that his betting patterns show that he's likely not strong, this is a pretty powerful indicator that we have the best hand. Now, there is one really important value betting caveat, which is that our opponent has to call with worse hands. So this means it seems correct to check with sort of obvious non-nut hands. We gave the example in the book. I believe the final board was 10, Jack, Queen, King, and then something else. And you have a 9. And it's like, okay, your opponent checks to you, but how likely is it if you have the best hand, he's going to call you with top pair, okay, given that any 9 or any ace is a straight. Or a very common example, let's say that we have queen high on a double pair board. Okay, it's just been checked down. You have a pretty aggressive opponent. You think that if he actually had a full house, he would have bet. If he had ace high or king high, he would have raised pre-flop. So you can say, look, queen high is very likely the best hand. But then what worse hands can he call with? So you do want to think and make sure that your opponent does have worse hands that could actually call. So the majority of the time, if you think your hand is best, you should bet. But it is worth giving some thought to. And now we're going to move to hand examples. And if you're not totally sure about this last slide, I'm going to give a couple more examples in these hands. So let's move right now to that. So first example is from a multi-table tournament. Here is going to raise ace-king suited. We get action from one opponent. You could definitely fire this flop. If you did, you would have to be willing to get it in at this flop, considering that we have 2 overcards, a gut shot straight draw. We'll see in the upcoming chapter on draws. This means we have a 10 out draw. So this is a pretty strong draw. Betting and being willing to get in at the flop is fine, but checking back is okay as well. Our opponent now makes a very small bet at the turn. We're going to at least call here because we have the odds to do that and our hand might be best. And at the river is this king. And our opponent bets 400. And the question here is, what should we do? Should we fold, call, or raise? Obviously, I think we're not going to fold. But here we can think about, for one thing, do we have a pretty strong hand? The answer is yes. It's much easier to have a worse hand than top pair, top kicker here, compared to a better hand. And also, betting patterns are really important. So that we can modify this situation pretty easily to make it so that we should not put in a raise. So for example, if we have a deep or effective stack with this player, and after we check back the flop, he now bets 1,600. And then at the river, he bets 5,000, which is, right about the pot size. Then we might not raise. But his betting pattern is saying, I am weak. He is saying, please raise me. I don't know if you can hear him. He's villain 29, and he's whispering that to you right now. Betting a min bet of 400 to 3,000 says, I don't really like my hand. I don't have a very strong hand. If I did, I would bet more than that. So we can use his betting patterns to say, hey, we very likely have the best hand. And we're going to put in a raise. And worse hands that can call us would be like Queen Jack, King 9. So there are plenty of worse hands that can call. And Hero makes a nice small raise where all of these worse hands can call. And let's see what our opponent has. He does, in fact, have a kind of marginal queen hand. So this is an excellent raise for value at the river. Let's take a look at another example where this time we're also going to have a decent hand with the king. That's a pretty good transition, I think. So our opponent makes a 2.5 blind raise. We call him the big blind. Pretty standard. Call his flop bet, and then we turn top 2 pair. We could actually bet out here even though he has the betting lead. That's a nice option. We don't want him to check back. But here he elects to check. Our opponent checks back. And now Hero bets. There are plenty of better hands that he could have. He can have straights, he can have flushes, he can have better 2 pair. But still, the majority of the time, our hand is going to be the best hand. It's difficult for him to have better from a hand combination perspective. So if we pull it up in Equilab again, we put in all of the better hands versus all of the worse hands. There are going to be a ton more worse hands. And we can think, well, what worse hands are going to call us? An example is an ace. He could have a hand like ace jack, ace 10, ace 9 of clubs. So any ace can call us. And that's the main hand that we're targeting here. So I like just betting for value, looking to get called by a worse hand. And that is exactly what happens here. Well done. Nice river value bet by Hero in this hand. So I didn't actually select it so that literally all these hands would have a king, but why not? Another king type hand. And Hero calls this. He's calling because of the fact that the bet sizing is fairly small, less than half pot, and king high could be the best hand. If not, we have 6 outs to make an overpair to this flop. So the flop check and call is reasonable. Folding definitely wouldn't be crazy either. The turn gets checked. So do we think we have the best hand here? The answer is yes. We think that a lot of the time we do. The reason for that is because our opponent could certainly have an ace, which beats us. But if he had an 8 or a 3, he's probably going to have continued betting. There are also fewer ways to make those hands. If he had a hand like pocket 7s, pocket 9s, he'd probably continue betting. So probably more than half the time, we have the best hand. But even so, I wouldn't bet here because it's too difficult to get a worse hand to call. If he has some kind of hand like 10-9 of clubs, he's just going to fold if we bet. So here we might have the best hand. I think, again, it's probably over 50%. Whether or not you agree with that, though, the key point is that it's too difficult to get a worse hand to call. And for that reason, I would not value bet here. And here are bets. So it's also going to be difficult if we're bluffing to get a better hand than ours to fold. That's an important concept we're going to talk about in another section. But for me, I prefer checking this river and don't think this is a good example of a late street bet. Now we're going to take a look at another ace-king example. So we raise under the gun, our opponent calls. We bet. Checking back would be okay as well, but I like betting if our opponent has a hand, like let's say he has 8-6 of hearts. Well, we deny him the chance of pairing for free. So there are good things that can happen from betting here. Both flop options reasonable. At the turn, we check back. We don't want to play a large pot. We have plenty of showdown value, plenty of ability to win without improving because ace-king is often going to be the best hand right now. And now we river the full house. And again, whether or not we put in a raise is going to depend a lot on who our opponent is and how tight or loose he is the stacks. So here I would definitely just raise. Our opponent only has 235 chips left. We don't have to be too worried about him having a 3. But let's say, for example, that we are deeper stacked with him. So going into the river, he has 3,000 chips and we cover that amount. So stacks are very deep and he's a tight player. We have to ask, is he going to bet full pot with a worse hand than a king and then also call a raise? So what would that mean? He has a hand like pocket 9s or ace 4 and he's going to bet 645 into 645 and then call an all-in raise to 3,000. So in that case, we might think, well, we're going to be winning or at least chopping the pot the vast majority of the time, but it's too difficult to get a worse hand to call. And for that reason, we just call his bet. So that's the kind of consideration we want to make. Again, though, in this example, because the fact he only has 235 chips left, he might just feel pressured by having a short stack. I would put him in for the remainder of his chips. Pardon me, I didn't mean to skip ahead there. Let's go ahead and look at the resolution. So it looks like Hero is going to value raise this river, and our opponent folds. So now let's look at the first hand of a multi-table tournament. I guess this guy actually has a few extra chips, but pretty close to the first hand. We make a standard 3 big blind raise in the cutoff with our ace-king. Betting and checking this flop are both fine. Once, though, we turn the ace, we want to go ahead and bet, get some value, protect our hand. And this is a really important spot because it's easy to see monsters under the bed. In other words, think, hey, the flush got there. My opponent always has the flush. But you have to keep in mind that the vast majority of the time, top pair, top kicker is going to be the best hand here. If your opponent really did hit a backdoor flush, he hit runner clubs to make his flush, for one thing, there's a good chance that he's going to bet out here at this river instead of check it to us. So what I would do here is just go right ahead and bet. We're targeting a worse ace. That's the main hand that's going to call us here. Some kind of hand like ace 10. He could have a hand like king queen that just kind of randomly called the turn. So we should go ahead and value bet this river and not worry too much about him having a better hand. And also, you're not going to get check raised all that much in these spots. If a tight or even an unknown player puts in a big check raise here, you can fold. So don't worry too much if you have to sometimes bet and then fold these hands. Our hand is likely to be best, and this value bet is completely correct. Let's now look at our last hand example. So this is another king queen. I didn't, when I applied filters, I didn't filter for you need to have a king, so a little bit confused as to how that's happened in all of these hands, but I like it. It adds sort of another dimension to the theme. And here with a 30 or so blind, just over 30 blind effective stack, here's going to raise in the hijack position, flop top pair and bet it. Bets half pot at this flop, so far in this hand it's pretty standard. Here then checks back this turn when the ace hits, which is fine. You could also bet here and then check back on the river, but checking back is a completely reasonable play. And then something interesting happens, which is the river is a blank. It doesn't really affect things at all. No draw comes in, and our opponent checks once again. And hero makes a small bet. And the purpose of this bet is saying, you know what, I think that even though there's an ace out there, that my second pair is the best hand. And the reason for that, the biggest reason for that is going to be betting patterns. If our opponent did have an ace, he's probably not going to check both turn and river. He's probably going to try to get some action with his top pair hand. So when he checks twice, his betting patterns are telling us that we very likely have the best hand. And hero makes a sort of modest attempt to get some value. You could actually bet even more than this. But the important thing is that we're going after value. And this is what's called a thin value bet. And what that means is that if we have the nuts, it's a clear standard value bet. Whereas if you have a hand that isn't quite as strong, like second or third pair, or maybe even ace high, and you bet it trying to get called by a worse hand, then that's a thin value bet. So this is a slightly thin value bet, but it's completely correct. And look at this. We face a shove, and hero does not believe it. He's a non-believer and loses to a better hand. So where hero goes wrong here is that going after this river value bet is completely correct. But unless you have a pretty good read on your opponent, like he's very aggressive, he's very tricky, we can just fold facing that check raise like we talked about in the last hand. So that is the misstep here. So that's going to end the hand examples for today on day 7 of value betting. More fun and exciting concepts to come. So this has been Colin Moshman for CardsChat.com and the Become a Winning Poker Player in 30 Days course with Katie Dozier. Thanks very much for watching.